life living and making a living can sometimes wear us out, grind us down, and dull our senses. So for a keen mind and a sharp contributive edge that can make it all easier and better and more productive, let's take some time to sharpen our axe. Stay with us right now for Life Talk.
Hello, I'm Gina Fitt, and you've either surfed to or purposely selected Life Talk with Bern Moses. Welcome to another in our series of ongoing verbal essays brought to you in this television format. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Bern, last week we were having a very interesting conversation. Anyway, I found it very interesting. And we were kind of discussing languaging and how the things we say affect our ability to be powerful in our lives, and how sometimes when we're reading material that other people have written or we're listening to statements that they may make, and some of them may come from very well-educated, very intelligent people, we need to question what we say, what we hear, what we read, and just ask the question, is this really valid? Or is there possibly another way of looking at this situation or these circumstances that will give me more power, or maybe will be more accurate? And again, a lot of it is in the languaging. And so I know you had several examples. We were able to cover a couple of ideas last week, and
it went fast last week too.
It went much faster than we both had anticipated.
Squeezing it in, and I did continue, and I have some more things to. I know we had read briefly from a comment by Dr. Whitfield here in his book, Healing a Child Within. It's a delightful book, but again, there was a little things that we challenged. There was one thing inside too that I noticed that I wanted to complement and develop. Because I don't want to give the impression I'm just a contrarian. I've been called a contrarian, that everything is wrong, and that's not so. I think there's more than enough room to complement a lot of work that's been done, and I spell complement in that case with an I. I mean, I appreciate, I enjoy, I benefited from, and I continue reading and benefiting. But I also will look very carefully to see maybe if there's something in there, or maybe not included, that would complement, that's spelled with an E, bring it closer to the truth, closer to fruition, you know what I mean? Closer to completion. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we did last week, and I don't know where we're going to go with this one, but I did know that this is something we don't talk nearly enough about. And he was making some reference here to our observer self. And this is taken out of context, but there is a part of us, he said, that's able to step back and to watch, to witness and observe what's happening in our lives. In other words, the real name for that is objectivity. This is not a natural state. In other words, it is natural to be subjective. I mean, to feel somehow that everything is happening around us and to us, and that we're victims, and that's fairly commonplace. In fact, I would say almost universal, that we're by nature subjective people, but we can't overlook and can't deny and shouldn't not practice our capacity to get outside of ourselves objectively and take a peek and see what's going on from other people's perspective.
Well, and if you studied any psychology at all, there's one philosophy of thought that says as children we start out being very egocentric, or thinking that we are the center of the universe. And anything and everything that happens must be because of us.
Right.
And so as adults, it's still very easy to fall back into those old habits of thinking and say, well, it must be because of me, instead of understanding there are forces at work all around us that are totally inconsiderate of who we are, what we are, what's going on in our lives.
Part of that thinking, too, is that everything that happens has a reason, which, you know, unconsciously is a way of surrendering all of our authority. I mean, really, that's what it's saying,
right.
And yet it's a common thing. I hear it all the time, that we met for a reason. Well, I just don't think that's necessarily so. We just met, and there can be reason in it.
Yeah, and a lot of times there are reasons, but they're not relevant reasons.
You got it.
We met at the grocery store because you needed milk and I needed eggs, and that's the only reason we met. There's no other reason other than that.
And now that we've met, though, that we can reason together, and there can be a lot of things that come out of it.
Determine what reasons we want to continue in this direction.
Done constructively, it's a very healthy practice. The observing is central to our thriving. In other words, to observe ourselves objectively. Now, I changed that a little bit. He said it's central to our recovery. And recovery is not what I'm interested in. You know what I mean? That's the first step. I'm interested in people thriving, moving on. We shouldn't be talking about survival when we're talking about human beings. We should be talking about thriving. We shouldn't be talking about survival of the fittest. We should be concerned with the evolution of everyone. And
you know, that's a really good point. Because and again, it comes back to do with languaging. If we're talking about surviving or struggling through, that's what we expect that experience to be. A struggle, a survival, a pain-filled, cataclysmic kind of, well, if I just hold on and my fingers are bleeding and I'll survive somehow. Instead of, this is an incredible adventure. This is a phenomenal opportunity. I'm going someplace. I'm not sure maybe where yet, but I'm so excited to get there. And I don't know what's going to happen along the way, but it's going to be wonderful.
I was doing pretty well with the common wisdom about that for years and years, I think. I'd probably succumb to it. Until one day, I remember specifically, this was the turning point for me. Robert Redford was on television, and he had the audacity to call himself a survivor. And I thought, you call that surviving? You know, good looking, you know, successful, you know, famous, got money and property and prestige and influence.
Get out the violins, huh?
Yeah, I don't call that surviving. And yet I understand that from his perspective. You know, it's all relative. I mean, he's still a survivor, but I really would prefer that he think of himself and let us know that he's a thriver.
Or a great adventurer.
Exactly.
A great leader, yeah.
And I thought, that guy's not surviving. Let's get serious about our languaging here, you know. And yet you hear it all the time. I heard it today from a young man who obviously has huge capacities, who used the word surviving, and it's not sufficient at all.
But it's the words that we use to frame our experiences that
frame our experiences.
That frame our experiences. Absolutely. And that is by those words are which we continue to use to remember those experiences, and which become embedded in our subconscious mind, and that's how our subconscious mind perceives future experiences.
And be careful. It's not just what you say. It's what you think, and it's what you accommodate other people saying. And
it's the feeling that comes with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can, I've known people who were Pollyannish in their positivism. You know, they always had a silver lining to every dark cloud, and everything was going to be okay. All you had to do is be positive. Or someone saying, look, don't worry, this is not going to happen. You know, a parent telling a child, I'm not going to die, don't worry.
But that's not objective or accurate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's the things that we say, sometimes the things that we think in concert with that and accommodate in our mind. But I think just as dangerously, that we accommodate what other people say in our presence, and if we don't screen it out, if we don't go, whoa, wait a minute, I mean, purposely reject it, it becomes part of our thought process, whether we like it or not.
Absolutely.
It becomes part of our consideration for everything, and we have a right to get militantly adamant about what people are saying in our presence, and we typically don't.
And well, a lot of times we tend to reinforce what they say, even at a subconscious level.
Yes.
Like, I'm no good at baking. Susie's very good at baking, which means I'm no good at baking, or she's better than I am. And so every time I bake something, it's not going to turn out right. Every time she bakes something, it's going to be wonderful. So we compare and contrast, and we further reinforce that negative image of our ability or our power in that circumstance.
One of my favorite illustrations of that, in seminar I'll say, does anyone here know anyone who has trouble getting up in the morning? And there's always some hands that go up, whether it's them or someone they know. And I say, and you understand that's why. And there's always that kind of...
They go, huh?
Yeah. And I say, that's why they have trouble getting up in the morning. And they're still looking at me kind of funny. And I'll say, how many times do you suppose that person has said that in the last, week, month, year, decade? I mean, over and over every day, there's some comment about how they hate to get up in the morning, how hard it is to get up in the morning. And then, of course, that's confirmed by their families. They say, you got to get up in the morning. Well, he has more trouble getting up in the morning. You know what I mean? And if they wrote a book about the guy, they'd probably say it.
Yeah.
Third party.
It's like every one of those words is a little lead BB that goes into a sack that you carry on your
Good.
shoulder. And the more times you do that, the heavier that sack gets.
Good. That's a good illustration. That's bad. I think objectivity is something we need to be conscious of. The fact that you can get outside and say, okay, how would... It's kind of like at home I could have a certain mess around me and say, well, what would Gina think if she saw this? You know, and I know exactly what you would think if you saw that. You know, and I would be embarrassed, and so I cleaned it up. You know?
That's because you haven't seen the mess at my house.
Now that's another issue. Here's one that troubles me a lot. And these are delightful people with an incredible mission, a worthwhile purpose. I mean, laudatory experience. I'm not going to get into it, but, well, I was called the People's Network, and people are involved in this thing. And they have a logo phrase, they call it. And every time I've read this, I kind of go, oh, like this. It says, their intention, their mission, is the supporting the never-ending search for the best within you. And every time I read that, I say, no. Supporting the never-ending search for what's available to you, perhaps. You know what I mean? But there is no best within you already. And there's a lot of talk goes on about that stuff. That the wisdom that lies within us, that if we just quiet our mind. For example, I'm going to take a moment and see if I can support that in some other ways. Here's another, how to gain power and influence with people. And see if I can find a couple of these comments that say this. And these are wise people and very successful and highly accoladed and respected and admired and published. And they're wealthy and they're successful. And if they're not careful, they confuse us. See if I can find it here. You possess talents and capabilities just waiting to be utilized to their fullest. Well, see, if a guy doesn't feel that way, he might wonder, well, how do I connect with that? And spend a lot of time trying to connect with that, and I don't believe it's true. In other words, the evidence is too clear that we're vacuums of ignorance and, you know...
So in other words, you would say there are talents and opportunities lying around for you to reach out and take a hold of and develop.
Part of it. Or that you have a capacity to learn, to grow, and to develop through practice abilities that could lead you anywhere you want to go. See, an ability is a practice capacity. In other words, there's no reason to think we have an ability to do anything with a wild, exceptional case with the gifted ones. You know, once in a while you wonder, how is it that this person who is a savant, idiot savant, can play the piano so beautifully? And that's all they can do. You know what I mean? But those brain cells are functioning in that way to allow that person to accomplish that. We don't know that, but typically a healthy mind is empty. You know what I mean? There is no wisdom within. There is no majesty there waiting to be revealed if we just quiet and listen carefully. I just don't believe that for a second. And yet I'm ready to say, hey, I'm entirely wrong. I don't, you know what I mean? But the thing is, the evidence is clear. The way I see it is this: if you take a baby, and you put it in a dimly lit room with no stimuli. It's just a room, all right? No stimuli in there, and you feed it tasteless pablum for, say, 20 years, and what are you going to have? You know, you're going to have a vegetable, a baby brain inside of this adult body. In all probability, it won't even be alive. If it's not nurtured and spoken to, there's a thing called marasmus that usually will occur. The spine actually shrinks, and it could kill the child if there was no communication and no caressing. A lot of people don't realize that, and part of that need never diminishes. The human touch, being caressed and stroked and held, is pretty important to all of us, but especially a child. They won't even mature if they don't have that. But there's nothing that's going to happen. To take it even further, I'm convinced, that you could fill a room. Say you get 100 of the finest minds in the world, and you put them in a room, okay, and you feed them, but you don't let them communicate. No sign language, no written stuff, no verbal communications at all, and you leave them in there for a year. What's going to come out of that room? 100 people that knew exactly what they knew when they went in there. You know what I mean? If there's no communication, no impulse, no stimuli, there's not going to be any growth because the brain doesn't educate itself.
No communication between them?
Right.
But don't you think...
But if there was communication between them, you could walk out with 100 different people.
But, well, I don't know. I'm going to question you right now.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Good, yeah.
Because I know a lot of times there have been people in very, very depraved circumstances, for example, prisoners in concentration camps, who may have had some contact with each other, but it was very limited. And they were extremely ingenious in how they spent their time, the things that they occupied their minds with, what they built in inside their little tiny space that was their prison cell, what they thought, what they prayed, what they sang, even if it was to themselves, that got them through that time. And the more creatively they used what they had, the resources that were with them, inside them, around them, the more successfully they survived that experience and were able to integrate back into society when they came away from that experience. Okay,
what they were doing is nurturing, maintaining what they already had. For example, there's stories of a violinist who every day, and pianists, for example, every day who practice the piano in their mind. Okay?
You don't think they could write new music?
Oh yeah, because they have the capacity. That's collative thinking. So they could take music and they could write new music, but it's unlikely that a pianist, for example, okay, would become a violinist. You would develop that skill. What it is, they're nurturing and preserving what they have and collating and developing it. Remembering their families, for example, and having communications with them and whatever. But that was a survival instinct that would cause that to happen. Now, if they didn't do that, there's a real degeneration of the mind. Well, you come out of there an animal, no question. But yeah, what I'm saying is, if we put 100 people in a room and don't let them communicate at all in any way, okay, that in all probability, what's going to come out of that room is 100 people with the same intellect they went in with. There wouldn't be any. See, here's the thing.
You don't think they would occupy themselves with whatever was available in their environment? Maybe build things, maybe experiment with things.
But it would be
limited.
Compilation of what they already knew. See, what I'm saying is they wouldn't learn anything from each other.
Right.
There would be no growth as an individual. What I'm saying is that all of us are sum totals, okay, of all the experiences we've had, the people we've met. If we want wisdom, I may find some in you, I may find some in Jeff or one of our viewers, and they may find some in me, but it's not going to come from within. It's not hiding out in there somewhere, connected with some universal wisdom. Now that's flying right in the face of a lot of thinking.
Well, I agree with that. I don't think that we have like all the wisdom of our ancestors or some universal central source that we are tapped into where we can think and know everything that everyone has known.
Yeah,
but I think we are like raw. We have raw natural resources within us that we can build and create, put things together.
Right.
Like if you take a country that has minerals, they have fossil fuels, they have trees, they have soil, all these things that they can create and build and develop something with. I think we have that within ourselves.
Right. There are no limits. It says here, there are no limits. Of course there are. We have limitations on us. You know, people say, you can do anything you want to do. I've heard that a lot in the motivational field. You can do anything you want to do. You can't. No, you can't. You got to be within the law. Law of gravity, law of cause and effect, equal and opposite reaction. For example, the probability, the likelihood, even the possibility of you ever playing for the National Basketball Association is zip. You know what I mean? It's not that you're not a nice person and intelligent as anybody there, but there's some laws governing that activity that you can't overcome. Gravity. I mean, you know what I mean? In other words, gravity, cause and effect. You're on that court with 250 to 75-pound athletes who can jump half their height, you know what I'm saying? And with all these developed skills that they've been working on since they were 6, it's unlikely that you're ever going to play the game. You know what I mean? And I'm saying, no, you can't do anything you want to do. You can do anything you want to do within a law. You know, the law of cause and effect, equal and opposite reaction, and the law of man. You know what I mean? In other words, see, those other things are law of God if you want, but man says you can and can't do certain things too, to violate, you know what I mean, the norm. And so we have to be careful, because I've had people get frustrated about this. Yeah. You know, they get frustrated. The impossible doesn't exist. Well, of course it does. You know, you're not going to fly. You're not going to fly, Gina. I mean, you know what I mean? You know, all the laws say that's impossible without added assistance. I mean, you might get a jetpack or a set of wings, maybe, that someone might develop someday, but Gina Fit, per se, is not going to fly.
So a lot of those statements are catch-all remarks that are not very well defined.
Right.
For example, perhaps I could play in the NBA if it was a charity game and they were playing with people that they chose a number and came down from the audience to play.
Exactly. I mean, if you made a shot and they paid you a lot of money or something. Yeah. We possess an innate power to renew our lives at every moment, and you'll discover the freedom that comes with being able to make the right choices while never having to make a choice. That sounds incredible. Wow. How do I go?
That doesn't sound like it even makes sense.
Yeah, and yet this guy is famous, man. People hang on every word, you know, and it's okay. The competitive nature of our society fosters in us, creates a constant battleground for our minds and souls. Turning off the racket of conflict and doubt, you know, all the sounds and stuff that goes on, and listening instead to the part of ourselves that inherently knows everything. Okay? We really need to know is what the power of a free mind is all about. Our free mind, when we learn to listen to it, offers us complete harmony and accord.
And then you go around wondering, where's my free mind? Why isn't it responding?
So, and the guy probably sold 1,000 of those things. Or tens of thousands, I don't know. I mean, you could go on and on with this kind of, oh, this is kind of fun too. Let me go to this one. I've always been troubled by this one. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, here it is over here. This is a friend of mine. I mean, an old acquaintance, and he's done pretty well. It says that you can't get where you want to go unless you know where you're going. And that's good, you know. And yet there's part of that says you can't get anywhere worthwhile unless you know where you're going. It's real close, isn't it? That's really what that's saying. You can't get anywhere worthwhile unless you know where you're going. Well, you can. My life has been filled with people who, because they were functioning, you know, didn't have any established goal, quote, quote, no intention, weren't pursuing anything special, but were doing what they enjoyed doing, and we've talked about purpose, you know, fulfilling their life's purpose. And someone noticed them and subjectively selected them for elevation. I mean, I don't think a week goes by in my researching where I don't hear a success story that falls into that category, where the person was subjectively selected. That means, like, you just happened to see someone that you invested in because you had the power, the authority, the connections to do so, and you took them right out of the muck and mire, and they were successful. You know, you took away the barriers and the difficulties and what have you, and set them right where they needed to be. The Horatio Alger moment, I call it, where someone comes along and makes it all okay. And it may never happen. So that's why it's important to be on purpose, because if you're on purpose, fame and fortune may be a happy consequence. You may get selected by an authority figure who subjectively thinks you're just wonderful and wants the world to know about it. But if not, you'll still be happy. I mean, you can still feel complete and have made your contribution. And I think that's important. But you have to be careful of that kind of languaging. I guess it's because I've had so many thousands of people in my life who really wanted it, and most of them ended up frustrated. You know, it didn't come together because they were buying into concepts that led them into blind alleys. And that's always been troubling to me. It's always been troubling to me. Stop and think, evaluate what's really true here. Can I buy this? In other words, is it essentially always true? Is it always true? Okay, I'll buy that one. I mean, something that's been established. I don't lose I haven't surrendered my need to or my desire to create and to wonder, you know, to wish. A little metaphysical here and there, but I'm careful. I try to be careful. And we're pleading with people to kind of be aware of these things as you're going through. And of course, we call them Kurt Uyops. See, these are all Kurt Uyops in my mind. You remember a Kurt Uyop is a admonition or an aphorism or a cliche, seemingly intended to elevate us and yet tends to mediocritize us. I mean, it kind of diminishes us without even being conscious of it if we're not careful. things like practice makes perfect. It doesn't. We've discussed that. Practice doesn't make perfect. It makes better, you know, but there's a little piece of our mind.
Unless you're practicing imperfectly.
Exactly.
It can make things worse.
Yeah, I saw someone talking about that the other day and said you can practice and practice and practice, and if you don't have any coaching, an objective outside view, an authority who knows exactly how to do it, you'll never get very good at it. And if you do, you'll be lucky. You'll be really lucky. You know, it's a funny thing about that, too. This is worth discussing. In the physical arena, okay, people are pretty content to copy. You know, to practice trying to do what that guy does. It's like I could line up 100 different people and say, do you play golf? And they say, yeah. And I say, okay, show me how you hold the club to do a drive. And they'll all hold the club about the same way. You know what I mean? Or if you say, would you like to throw a football? And you'll say, yeah. And you say, how do you throw a football? And most people will hold it the way, you know, Steve Young and Troy Aikman hold it. You know what I mean? Everyone's trying to do it that way. It's not that way in verbal communications. It's the darndest thing. Everyone wants to do it their way. When it comes to communicating verbally, like in sales and what have you, they don't want to learn the script. They want to say, well, that doesn't feel good, I'll do it this way. Well, if you did that in sports, you would never make it. I mean, you have to get aware that, for example, there's not a football in the league, a football player in the league holding the football at the end and wobbling it out as a pass. It just doesn't happen. It might be cool, but it doesn't work good. Gina, we've done it again. We've dashed through a half hour, and I think we have to say this is Life Talk, and got a couple phone numbers here, 1-800-661-3490 if you're outside the 916 area. But if you're in 916, you can call directly into 366-8749, and we'll send you a Life Talk brochure, flyer, that tells all the times that we're on the air. And so you can kind of tune in. Don't tune in next week at the same time. I had someone did that last week, and they caught the end of the show. Yeah, you got to tune in a half hour early in order to see the whole thing. But call us, and we'll send you some stuff, and we might even send you a ticket to a free concert. I don't know. But we'd like to make friends. And my name is Bern
Moses.
And you're Gina Fitt.
Thank you, Bern.
I'm glad of it. Yeah, thank you, Gina. Appreciate you.